There is a lot of love between them and a lot of history between them. So
Sure.
getting those two icons together was one of the points of making this film.
Yeah, so the movie was shot in Maui, right? Paradise City?
Correct. We're just back here. We're doing a special screening for the locals to thank them. We had like tons of good support and good vibes. The Aloha spirit's a real thing here. So they're very happy to have us and welcoming filmmakers back again. So we did a little special screening for them last night. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, very cool. Well, there was a lot of local talent in the movie too, though, right? Like I noticed that it was kind of.
I wouldn't do it without it. It is about, no, listen, it's a fun thriller. It's a guilty pleasure. It's John Travolta and Bruce Willis and Stephen Dorff and the amazing Priya Lumberg and Blake Jenner.
Yeah.
So it's a great cast, and it's like a lot of my movies. It's thrilling and fun. Just we used all the beauty of the island. I'm talking about the island itself and the people. So we got to put a lot of local actors in some key roles, and I think it really helped the texture of the film.
Well, I noticed you had Branscombe Richmond credited a couple times, and I always remember him as a huge action movie fan. I always loved seeing him turn up in things because he'd always.
Do you remember him in Scorpion King? Do you remember him by chance? This is how we first.
That's how you met.
He plays The Rock's blood brother. I directed Scorpion King.
Yeah, I know you directed Scorpion King, of course.
Yeah, but we're old friends from that. And Branscombe lives here and has the production side wired. So you have a wonderful actor, and he's actually a pretty good production guy, producer as well.
Well, I always loved seeing him show up in action movies too. Like even, he would even show up in like License to Kill. James Bond fights him at one point. Like it was, he always had a really cool look. There was like, so I always noticed.
Still does, man. He's doing some family friendly films here, and this is one of those guys who's just kind of larger than life character, but he brings the sunshine, Branscombe.
Yeah, nice. So yeah, let me ask you a bit about, because it's a hell of a cast. First things first, I want to ask, when I see a movie like this, an action movie, kind of like an old school kind of throwback in some ways. What kind of resources do you guys have now when you're doing a movie like this? Because I was talking to a guy that did a movie recently in like 18 days, and it looked great, but it's like crazy to think that that's as short a schedule as
we did this in less than 18 days.
Wow.
So, it's one of those things where an independent film, as a director, we love our films to be more organized, but this is the problem with independent filmmaking, is the resources are shrinking because of the formula of pre-sales and tax credit and equity. It's a little complicated. But, these are different days. There's quite a split between what can show in a theater and Marvel movies and things like that, and what we can do in independent films. However, as a filmmaker, you get a lot more freedom, and I get to have my fun. But this is an ambitious film for the money we had, but it paid off. Let's put it like that, and it's a very enjoyable film.
Well, what I liked about it was I have kind of a bone to pick with a lot of movies that are coming out now, because I find they shoot so dark that it's almost impossible to make them out sometimes. And it was nice to see something colorful and clear. Like that's almost like it's a real kind of breath of fresh air to some extent.
That, when I said, all right, my overview of this, I've seen too many. If an action film is independent and has a limited budget, it too often is. The trailers all start to look the same because they're dark and muddy. Someone's got an AK, a car explodes. I said, look, we're going to shoot something on Maui. Let's really make it about Maui.
Sure.
Let the audience have as much fun seeing the movie as we did shooting the movie. So there's a lot of daytime, a lot of waterfalls, a lot of beautiful people, and John Travolta in fine form, again, as a great villain.
There's something about Travolta though, like he never phones it in, right? Like I was rewatching actually a bit of I Am Wrath the other day, because I know you guys did that together, which I thought was a cool little movie. But he also he never phones it in. That's the thing though. He always seems like he's very committed to having fun and having a good time.
One of the reasons John and I get along so well, there is no phoning it in. For us, it's 100%. We're there to make as great of entertainment for the audience as we can. He's just a world-class act. His scenes are some of the coolest in the movie.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I like his new look that he's got too. Well, I mean, for obvious reasons. I think he looks cool that way. I also liked, it was fun to see outtakes in the movie too. I feel like you don't see outtakes enough. And you could really tell that everybody seemed like they were having a really good time shooting it.
One of the reasons I wanted to put that in is we shot this a year ago last May here. Mm-hmm. And Bruce was still, he has his limitations, but he loved doing the movie.
Yeah.
And I wanted to throw a little bit of that in to show the fun we did have on the set.
Well, it is, I mean, that brings me to the kind of the elephant in the room, I guess. You shot it before anybody knew of his aphasia diagnosis, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Yeah. One of the things, though, that was kind of nice, though, is I think there's been a lot of speculation as to, what the working conditions were like on some of his other movies. You can tell this one he was having a great time.
No, he had a good time. His producing teams is also his personal friends, so he went off golfing. I mean, all movies are work. I don't want to make this sound too much like a vacation, but to do 6 weeks in Maui, we had a short schedule, but I was prepping. He was delighted to be here, and I wanted to show that in the outtakes, and I think we got the best of Bruce in the film.
Well, and there was that nice moment in the outtakes too, where Travolta is like holding him at gunpoint. He just says, "Oh, I love you, man." Like, was that the first time they'd seen each other in a long time, or?
Well, it was still bouncing off of that. I mean, the first thing we did was all of their scenes together. The first scene they had together was in the steakhouse. Mm-hmm. So, it was remarkable because there is a lot of love between them and a lot of history between them. So Getting those two icons together was one of the points of making this film.
Well, I liked, you can hear Bruce Willis in the background, like, "Hey, you look good." That's kind of fun to see.
And then listen, John says, "I love you, man." It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to say we're actually huge fans of yours at the site. We run a channel, JoBlo Originals and JoBlo Horror Originals, that we do this series Revisited, and we go back and we look at a lot of movies. And we've been on kind of a kick of doing your films lately, though, because there's a lot of classics there.
Thank you.
One that's really interesting I feel like it's been totally rediscovered. I hope you don't mind me asking about it, but it was kind of ignored, I guess, when it first came out, but now there's a huge cult going up around it, is The Blob. In fact, The Blob showed up on Criterion Channel recently as part of a retrospective of 80s horror. I
just did a new 4K color timing on The Blob. And it was, I'm like, I'm glad, folks still get it. But one of the reasons that happened, to be honest, was the distributor changed completely right before it was released. So one of the dark side of Hollywood is new executives are not invested in old executives' movies. So I was very upset upon the release because there was very little advertising. They just kind of put it out there, but it was discovered in years since. And again, that was a cool group of independent filmmakers, and The Blob was very difficult to make work. But when I look back at the practical effects, some of it stands up pretty well.
Really well. That was so. I watched it with my wife, who's is a bit younger and didn't see it when she was younger, and she loved it. And we were like, it looks so much better though than it would have looked if it was made 10 or 15 years later, because it didn't rely on CGI. It was like practical stuff.
I've seen Blob-esque things in CGI, and I have a whole philosophy about practical effects. I like to enhance things with CGI, but when you start to use, and believe me, I was a pioneer with The Mask with
of course.
CGI. So it's a wonderful tool, but when it's used too much, or when it's used to be the antagonist of the film 100%, it works pretty good in superhero films, but in horror, there's something just not that scary. So I like combining practical effects with CGI now, and I'm talking about returning to a horror film I think you guys would like.
Which one? What are you doing?
We'll see. You'll see soon. We'll see. It's Hollywood. I gotta make sure the railroad tracks are laid out properly, and then we'll announce.
Because The Blob is real when you watch the movie. That's the thing. It looks like it's a real thing that exists. And like when Donovan Leitch is covered in the blob, that scene's insane at the beginning of the movie, and he's melting. It's like, wow, that's like something that's really on him.
There's a variety of techniques I use there, but one of them is a close-up of Donovan with what we call a blob sheet. A blob, we call them prom dresses because they were quilted, and then we would inject the goo in them. But one of those shots was uncomfortable for him, and he's screaming, and the blob sheet's being pulled over his head, and it's quite a little bit like drowning when you're in there, But it was done safely. But I think sometimes those close-ups capture the horror of the whole scene in a great way.
Well, it's very unsettling when you watch the movie. Very unsettling, and then you have the kid get killed too. Like I feel like that. I don't know if you'd be allowed to do that now.
I'm sorry, I killed it. It wasn't.
Oh, that was good though.
I didn't really kill a child. It was an illusion, and the young man was happy to do it, of course.
I'm sure, but it was a unique twist, and then there was also Candy Clark in the phone booth and the sheriff. Like I wasn't expecting any of that.
Yeah, they were wonderful. And one of the things that makes Donovan Leitch scary, it's an old structural thing that's cool in horror films, is you take the supposed lead,
Yeah.
dust him early, and the audience knows there's a maniac at the wheel. So you create another kind of suspense or jeopardy when they don't know who might go next.
It was such a great cast, though. Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, they were both really fun in that movie.
It's one of my films I enjoy seeing. Every couple of years, I'll check it out again. And now there's even a better print.
Well, I got asked to that extent. How about Dream Warriors? Is that something to you that you get a kick out of, the fact that most people consider that, you know, the best nightmare movie outside of maybe the first one? Like, it's the one that kind of set the tone for the rest of the series, I think.
It did, and it was hard to convince them to let me make Freddy darkly humorous in a surreal, dangerous way. But once they saw the reaction to seeing Freddy in a tuxedo and Freddy turn to a snake thing, going visually wilder was my intention. They made him funnier and funnier, which kind of was a mistake. They played the formula out after that. But Robert Englund is brilliant. Wes Craven was a genius to come up with the idea, and I just wanted to take it a step further. The real secret to that film, and people still want to interview me about that film today, I think was the heart of the kids and the concept that we all have our powers in our dreams, which really is a metaphor. We all have our powers in our heart inside of us. And by joining together, they could defeat the greater evil of Freddy. That's a terrific story.
Well, it was kind of a betrayal in the next movie when they killed off a bunch of the characters too. I remember hating that when I was a kid.
Out of my hands. Out of my hands. I like rooting interest in my film. I don't want to make the heroes necessarily obvious, but I like rooting interest. I worked at a halfway house for suicidal teens as a volunteer for a little while before Frank Darabont and I wrote, and isn't Frank wonderful? Frank Darabont and I wrote our draft of the screenplay, and I tried to put some of the angst and the support for each other I saw those kids doing back in the day, back in Hollywood, at this halfway house. And I think that's another thing that, even though as the film ages, the sense of those kids taking care of each other is another plus that keeps that film alive.
Well, getting back to Paradise City, I do want to ask, Bruce Willis, did you ever have, in the 90s when you were, you know, I mean, you also did a really classic action movie for us, Eraser, which is like the pantheon of action movies on our site, at least.
Thank you.
Had you ever worked with Bruce Willis before, though? Because I was going over your filmography and I couldn't really see, but it looked like you must have.
We attempted to after Eraser. I'm obviously a huge Bruce Willis fan.
Yeah.
And there was another big budget sort of studio film, but those, because they're expensive, all the stars have to align literally for those to happen, and that didn't quite happen. So when this came up, a Bruce project they were interested in me directing, I said, well, what if we bring in John Travolta and really,
oh wow,
you know, get the two guys at each other. So that's how it all began.
Are you ever? So I'm hoping that you kind of continue with Travolta as well, though, because I really like Travolta, and I find that Travolta often is underrated these days. But
he's one of our best actors. I mean, each project. Yeah, he really is. And when you're on the set with someone like this, it's just a different thing. John and I have a certain kind of relationship. He likes to get in the zone. The set is like the way it should be, and we let him go for it. It's interesting because he didn't take this character too far, but there is a zest of villainry in the character of Buck in this film that I find very entertaining.
Well, he always has that, and he has some really great lines in the movie too, though, and there's some really great shots. I mean, yeah. One thing I will say though, is as a huge Travolta fan, I think that's why I liked I Am Wrath so much, is I do like seeing him as a good guy too, though. Sometimes.
Oh no, he could do. Look, he's an incredibly versatile actor. Yeah. Look at the range of this guy's career. Was he swinging a paint bucket in Saturday Night Fever with that walk? And you're still seeing Brad Pitt do that. I mean, this is a guy who's created some iconic roles.
Yeah.
Before we finish, I just want to say I'm a fan of JoBlo because I've noticed you guys get it on some of my films. I make films for the audiences, for global audiences. So they're not necessarily praised by critics, but we entertain people, we make them smile, and there's actually a really nice edge to the sense of camaraderie among the local people in Hawaii that is a real thing, the aloha spirit they call it, that we tried to create in the film as well.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun, and thank you very much for talking to me. I had a blast talking to you. I could talk to you all day. There's tons of your movies that I love that I would ask questions about, but thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, thanks.
Carry on, JoBlo.
Thank you very much.
Are you too stupid to die? You've been chasing me for 10 years.
I'm a little OCD.